Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor covering round 8, a very decisive round from the Chess Candidates Tournament 2013, and this game is between Vladimir Kramnik and Peter Svidler. Kramnik opened with d4, and we could have had King's Indian defense, but this now turned into a Grünfeld d5 in this position. Well, some of you might ask, why g6 and then d5 and not bishop g7 but d5? Let's just drop back. So this position, black to move, if d5 immediately. The difference is that after takes, and e4, there is no knight on c3 to take for black. But in the actual game, after g6, knight c3 now, and d5 in this position, takes, now after e4, black can take this knight. White's idea is that the bishop on g7 is blockaded with this pawns, and black's idea is simply to be very quickly with castles and afterwards hit hard at the center with a move like c5. So black is trying to destroy white's center and after having castled. Okay, let's just drop back again for the last time. After g6, knight c3 and bishop g7 instead of d5, then white gets to play e4 and d5 doesn't work. So this is the explanation of black's move order with d5 in this position. Takes, e4, knights are exchanged, bishop g7, knight f3 getting developed, and now the c5 push. And now you see, if white plays a stupid move, let's say a very beginner's move like takes here, then bishop takes c3 is the least move for black. Queen a5 is of course possible as well. This is just a terrible position for white to have. So c5 by black, how to react? Bishop e3, queen a5, pinning this defender of d4. So you see the theme of this opening for black is simply to pressurize white center very early in the game. Queen d2 to unpin the c3 pawn. Knight c6, even more pressure with normal development moves, so this is why the Grünfeld is so popular. Rook c1, main move. This is still theory. Takes, queens are exchanged, and the king recaptures. Let's just drop back. Well, if you take on d2 with the knight, well, you simply see that this pawn is a goner, and even if it weren't so, such a move is a backward move early on in the game, and that makes this developed knight on f3 a worse piece because it doesn't control the center so well. So instead of knight takes, king takes. That keeps the knight here, and after having exchanged the queens, the king in the middle of the board isn't that much threatened. It's way easier now for the white side, which is uncastled and in the middle of the board with his king, to play on, because there are no flexible pieces in the center to hassle the king. Castles by Svidler, and d5. These moves are still theory. The pawn is pinned. King c2 to attack the knight again. Knight e5. Knights are exchanged. Bishop c4. Bishop d7. Well, a little drawback for black is of course that white has more space in the center, But therefore, you know, I mean, it's white. He's probably got more space in the center. But there are, after having exchanged so many pieces, there are less pieces to back up that pawn, so they are not really that of a threat. There is a tempo gain for white here with f4, bishop drops back, and of course e5 is a move to keep in mind for white. But if e5 here in this position, which isn't the game continuation because of bishop a3 simply, this attacks the c1 rook, bishop f5 check is coming soon, so rook b1 would lose the exchange then. So if rook d1, then check the other way with a4, the bishop can get in between, and now you see how black can get very active in this variation. King b1, and after rook c3, it's actually, as the engine suggests, quite even, but white is under big pressure, and they have to know how to deal with this. If bishop d2, this is a mistake. The rook can take on b3, and after this exchange you see that the king lacks squares. All these squares are controlled by black. The rook on d1 is attacked, and the engine suggests just to play bishop e3 here. But I think this looks like a losing position after taking on that pawn. But if you don't do that, if you play rook e1, then the pawn is a goner anyway. Bishop e3 here, and well, after moves like a5 and then a4, keeping this bishop here steady monster, I think the white king is under big trouble and under big pressure. So this is what can happen if e5 is played in this position. Black gets too active, and this is why Kramnik played the correct idea of getting the king out of any pins from the rook. And f6 now to stop e5, because e5 was a threat now. a4 to stop b5 from black. Rook dc8. Of course the rook here has no big future. h4, playing on both flanks. Rook ab8, bishop b5. The bishops are exchanged, and a6. White's move was b6 here. Why b6? Let's just drop back. Of course, the king is in opposition to the rooks, and this would make it, of course, wrong to just take on a6. I mean, black attacks the king here. So let's just drop back. So this is why b6 is played. And the other idea, instead of b6, say rook takes rook, and rook takes rook, and now takes, and rook a1 to attack the pawn, check, in between move, king c3, and a5. Now the pawn cannot be taken because of bishop b4 check, winning the rook. So rook a4 would be a move, and that allows black to just bring his king into the game, and this looks like a good position for black to play on. White isn't that active anymore, and this is just because you ceded the initiative with taking on c8. White actually has a better control of the c file, so why to cede that by exchanging of rooks and give black control over the file. And this is why b6 is played, and white is still pressurizing the c file. And this keeps this rook more dormant. So these are the little things in such moves like pawn to b6 that shows you the difference between grandmaster players and weaker players. King f7, h5 to get this rook activated, and this is why the rooks are exchanged. In between move with takes on g6 check, king takes, and bishop takes c1. Of course the rook wants to stay here and attack that pawn here. So what to play now for black? Rook c8 was a move which he didn't play. Svidler played rook g8 instead. But let's look at rook c8. Then I think f5 check would be the move. See, this nice diagonal for the bishop is opened. And after king g7 check, king f7, bishop e3. So what did white manage? He got his bishop out of e3, and well, the king is not protecting the pawn anymore, so king g7 again, and rook h4 with the threat of rook g4 check, king steps aside, and bishop h6, and then maybe even followed up with rook g7, trying to attack this pawn and getting very active. Maybe black was afraid of this, but bishop c5 would solve all his problems. Say rook g4 check, king f7, and bishop h6 would be a mistake here because of rook g8. And after exchanges, well, the pawn here is a goner. Sorry, say, well, the pawn cannot be protected. You see, that's no good for white. So rook c8 would have been a good move. Rook g8 was Svidler's choice. g4 by Kramnik. h6. And now rook h5. So white has space and the initiative. Black really has to defend, and this is quite uncomfortable. King f7 and e5. Bishop c5 and e6 check. King f8. And what if... sorry. King f8 was the move. What if rook takes pawn? Well, then we just exchange pawns, and after check, rook g8, and the position is quite drawish. So instead of exchanging pawns, white keeps his better pawns because they are connected. White keeps that pawn and still maintains the pressure on h6. It's interesting to see that the engines suggest the move bishop takes pawn, bishop a3 then as the best continuation, bishop c7, but now rook takes pawn, pawn is taken from the white side as well, and now there are different moves. I mean, if you play, well, we can take the pawn even here with check, and on rook h8 check, rook g8 doesn't work anymore because of bishop takes, king takes, and well, this is a winning position for white. So rook h4 was white's last move, king g7 to keep the pawn protected instead of bishop takes b6, f5 now, and all the pawns here are on light squares, whereas the bishop controls the dark squares. Very good. So, how to protect that pawn? I think it's impossible. After rook h8, white's position is very overwhelming. Say rook h2, and well, if black takes that pawn, d6 is threatening, very strong. And if black takes this, which is even worse, I mean, what to play else? That pawn is really a threat here. And if the pawn is taken, I mean, there is this crushing move, bishop takes h6, and if rook takes, and e7, and the pawn is queening. And after bishop takes h6, king g8, well, then you have g5 with the threat of taking on f6. So if that pawn has to be taken, f6, and this is overwhelmingly strong. So this is maybe what Svidler saw, and this is why he played rook d8. Now the pawn is gone anyway, and king c4 protects it. The pawn on b6 was taken, last hope, but now g5, very strong. Bishop f2 attacking the rook. Now the rook is in opposition to the black king. So king h7, and pawn takes pawn, leaving this bishop to the king. But I mean, these central pawns are just crushing. So pawn takes pawn and e7, check, king b3, bishop c5, and rook c4, with a threat simply to take that bishop, and the rook cannot take the rook afterwards because of pawn queens. And after, say, rook here, then you can take this, and after, well, if rook takes pawn, we have got an extra piece, and if king takes, d6 is winning for white. So this is why after rook c4 by white, Peter Svidler resigned to Vladimir Kramnik. Kramnik is in third position now with 4.5 points, and Magnus Carlsen and Levin Aronian are sharing first place with 5.5 points. But I didn't consider Magnus Carlsen and Levin Aronian's game as very interesting because it was a typical drawish English game. So I covered this game, which is a little bit more active and dynamic. I hope you liked it. Please comment, of course, subscribe. I appreciate every sort of support, and hope you liked the video. Please click on like then, and see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.